Hello woodworkers. I am going to show you how to cut a tenon on a table saw. But first I need to change out from a single blade to a dado stack. So that's what I'm going to do here. Notice that there are two wrenches here that I used. You kind of have to have that because there's no other way to stabilize the arbor, the thing that holds the blade, without that second wrench. So stacking these things together, 8-inch here, you'll notice that the writing is going to go on the outside of these two outside cutters. Alright, so two outside cutters. This one has the writing now on the left. That means that the teeth are facing the correct direction. Do not switch that around, because you're going to have a really loud and difficult cut to make. Alright, in between those there are a series of chippers. As long as the teeth are facing towards you, that's the direction that we want. And I'm going to put in maybe 3 of these things. There's a cheat sheet with every dado set that will tell you how many of these outside cutters, which you have to use every time you use a dado stack, and these chippers are required to make these cuts. You'll notice that I've offset the direction of these chippers so that when these are sandwiched together, none of these are in contact with, none of the teeth are in contact with each other. If they are, the carbide is so brittle it's going to start to break, which is a really horrible situation. They can be replaced. You just have to go to a saw sharpening service. And when tightening this thing down, I don't have to break a sweat. I just need to get it snug. So now that those are in place, my single curved blade or throat insert is no longer going to be effective. So I'm going to use this homemade one, and that will slip into this environment here fairly well. Alright, so what I've done is I've drawn out the end of the tenon here so I know where everything needs to be cut. What I want to do is raise up the blade. Let me show you in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to try to raise up the height of this blade, but I want to drop it down to below my line. Every time that I've tried to set this cutter to the bottom line, when I turn the saw on and cut, it always sneaks up past this line. So what I would be much more comfortable doing is creating an initial cut on both faces. So I'll run this board across the blade, flip it around, across, and see how the fit is. Once I've done that, then I'll continue to go through the cuts. Now, given where this is going to be going, because I want to utilize the fence with this, I'm going to have to cut this in such a way that you can't really see these cuts being made. The next thing I want to do is set up the outside of this particular tooth right there to my left, the furthest point away from the fence. And I want to set this up so that I can set the fence and have that function as my stop, so that I can't cut past that point. That looks pretty good. I know I'm right in the way here of this, but outside of that cutter goes to my line, not past my line. So that's where I want it to go. The last thing I need to do is utilize my miter gauge. Oops. Miter gauge is set up for a single blade cut. So I want to set this so that it's close to the blade but not actually touching. So operation will look like this to start. Remember the table saw, I always want to support the longest section of the board. I'll go through all the way, go through all the way at some distance from the end in, and I will test to see if it fits into my mortise. If it does, then I'll continue with the cuts. If it doesn't, then I'll set the height of the blade a little bit higher and then go from there. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Let me do a couple cuts, show what this looks like. My lines are still intact, and I've cut off, I don't know, under 1/4 of an inch, but that's enough for me to at least try to position this into my cut, or into my mortise, and I can see I'm well away from where I want to be, so that's great. All right, so easy way to remember this is that I need to raise the blade, so I'm going to rotate my adjustment wheel to the right. So right means raising, to the left means I'm lowering. And as a quick reminder, I know I've mentioned this before in other videos, I always want to start with this blade too low and then slowly raise it until I get to my cut. That way the vibration of the machine is not going to lower it. If I had started too high and then lowering it, the vibration is going to walk it down, and I'm always going to start perfectly with my cut, and then it's going to lower it, so my tenon is never going to fit. All right, let me keep going with this. Barely see the faintest line left. And I'm still a little ways away here, maybe a 16th. All right, I'm raising it up. Looks like it fits pretty well. So I'm grabbing this thing in there. There's enough connection. That feels pretty good. All right. So now that I have that set, I'm going to slide the board over until it engages with the fence. Then I'm done. So that's fitting pretty well. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So now the next stage in this, and if I have more than one of these, obviously before I change the height of the blade, I would flip this board around, do the other end, and if I've got multiple of these joints at the same size, I would do all of them at this setting before I adjust that blade height. Once I have found that height, I don't want to start messing around with it. You'll notice that I've drawn my dimensions here on the end, and I've carried those over to the faces of this board as well. It was here in these areas, but obviously since I cut that away, no longer available. All right, so because these cheeks, top and bottom, are a little taller than the other ones were, I'm going to raise the height of that blade once again. I'll go through in the same way, test it out. Once I've done that, I slide this thing over. All right, let me do those. Still not touching my line. I'm going to do it again with the higher blade. to be incredibly repetitive. If I did want to do this on multiple locations of this tenon, I would finish all of them before I move this, but I'm done with this one, which is what I wanted to do for the video. And you'll notice that I've got a nice consistent shoulder, nice consistent shoulder all the way around. This seems to be fitting well, and this is not falling out. It is falling out. I probably could have made this a little bit tighter, but that is the one location, or the one way of doing this here with the Dado blade. Once I've gotten some glue in there, I shouldn't have any problems with this thing fitting well. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. A couple things to point out. I've talked about this before. As far as safety goes, I'm either going to use the fence or the miter gauge or a sled, not both, except in this example right here. If I'm not elevating the blade all the way through, and I'm not cutting a waste piece that's going to be unsupported between the spinning blade and the fence, then I'm totally fine. Because I'm doing this and I'm using the fence as just a stop, I can go ahead and make this cut safely because there's not going to be a free piece between those 2 points. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, and so there we go. So I've got tenon cut here. You'll notice that the Dado blade, which has a unique feature in that each one of these teeth are ground flat, so that we'll be able to get a nice flat surface on the face of these tenons. And so that is how that one's done. If you don't have a Dado blade, no problem. I will in the next video take this thing out, put in a single blade, and show you the other way to do it. All right, see you in a minute.